Welcome back to the channel, guys. Today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite lures for that late summer, early fall period of bass fishing, and that's going to be a topwater popper. We're going to break down everything you need to know: rod, reel, line setup, how to choose the bait, and why this bait is so effective for this time of year. It's a super effective bait in the early fall for a couple reasons, but also it's just a very exciting and fun technique to fish, and that's ultimately why I lean on this a lot of times this time of year. Even though it catches a lot of fish, I like to do it just for fun as well, and we're gonna break all that down in today's video, so stay tuned and let's get right into it. All right, so everybody knows that the popper is such a fun technique to fish. Anytime you can throw a topwater of any sort, it's gonna be so much more fun than fishing anything else like a Ned rig or a Senko. So a lot of times if I can get them to eat the popper, or any topwater for that matter, that's gonna be the bait that I reach for. However, there's a period of time, late summer, early fall, especially for smallmouth bass up here in the Northeast, but it'll work for all species of bass no matter where you are in the country. Ponds, creeks, rivers, lakes, does not matter. I fished it in all those different environments, and it does work very well for a few reasons. Two things that the popper is going to do for you, and we'll show you out on the water today how to actually fish this thing and catch a couple fish on it. I'm filming the intros after the fact, but we've already went out and fished this bait. We're going to catch some fish later today. What this thing's going to do: when you pop this thing, you can just sit it in place. You can do one small pop and really just leave it sit into place. You can do a couple pops. You can chug this thing through the water. So you can do a lot of different things with one bait, whether it's just actually working the bait covering some water, which you could do with like a topwater spook or a whopper plopper or something like that. But where this bait really shines is when you can let it sit in place. In that late summer, early fall period, those bass, the first ones that start to push back shallow and look for that cooler water, or your resident fish that spend all summer shallow, this time of year the water is about the hottest it's going to be, and then it's going to start to dip. When that happens, those fish are going to look for shaded areas or heavy cover areas up there on the bank that they're going to have to live in, whether it's right next to a laydown or it's right underneath a shade pocket over an overhanging tree. Anything like that, if you threw a topwater spook in there, 3 walks and that thing's already out of there and you're outside the strike zone already. Where this, you can pop it and let it sit, pop it, let it sit, and it stays in the strike zone a lot longer, and you can target cast to certain areas. And that's what I'm going to do with this bait the most. I'm not going to cover a bunch of water with it. While you can do that, mostly I'm going to target cast this bait to a prime area, work it in place a little bit, reel that back out, and make another cast. The second thing that this is going to do, in the early fall, the bait is the smallest it's going to be. And if you've ever fished around September time, you know how tough it can be when those fish really key on those small bait fish. They get super zoned in on them. There's times when your fish are feeding on shad, you can throw, like, if they're feeding on shad, you're throwing a square bill, say you're throwing a 1.5 size crankbait, you can throw a 2.5 and you'll still catch fish on it if they're feeding on shad that are this big, just because it's close in size, and sometimes you'll actually get bigger bites. When they're feeding on those very tiny bait fish, you need the smallest bait that you can throw to get any bites at all. There are times when there'll be millions of those tiny bait fish. What they do is they come up and just get big mouthfuls of them. So if you throw something that's too big, all they think is that it's something else feeding on those bait fish, or they know that it's not real. They'll start to realize those tiny bait fish are real, that lure doesn't look real, and they get a good look at it, so they'll target on those smaller bait fish. They're just an easier meal, and it's a lot harder to get those fish to bite. That's when the popper shines, because they make them in very small sizes. Now, I have a few different sizes here, so like you can throw a really big one if you have some bigger bait fish or some bigger fish you're targeting, but they also make a very small one as well, and they make them even smaller than this. So my favorite is this Rebel Popper. That's the one that I've been throwing for years and years. This is the only one I have, and I have not lost it, and I don't plan on losing it. I've had this since I was about 10 years old. I throw the chug bug when they're really feeding on small bait fish, the original like storm chug bug. It's a very skinny profile bait and a lot smaller, so that gets a smaller profile. There's the KVD Splash popper. I don't even know if they make these anymore. I'll link all the products in the description below if you want to check any of these out. But the popper one, the Rebel ones, or these Booyah poppers, I don't think they make these ones anymore, but the Rebel ones are very similar. The regular size is like my go-to. If you have bigger fish, you can get the Magnum size. And for ponds, creeks, or when your fish are really feeding on tiny bait fish, the teeny size is my favorite. That's the one I grew up fishing as a kid. The teeny size popper, it's like half the size of this, and you'll catch a ton of fish anywhere using that bait. And then when it comes to color selection, I don't get too fancy with it. I throw something chrome or white, and that's pretty much it, because they're mostly just going to be feeding on bait fish. The only wild card I'll ever carry in my collection is a black popper. Sometimes I've seen it happen when the fish are literally feeding on bugs that are coming off the water. You can throw that black popper and they'll actually eat it thinking it's bugs if you work it correctly across the surface. That's a very, very specific use. A lot of times it's like when the cicada hatch happens, and I very rarely ever use that. Most of the time it's chrome or white for me, so that's all I really do there. And then quick rundown of the rod and reel selection before we head out on the water here. This is the Cashin Icon topwater and jerkbait rod. This is the 6'9" medium extra fast. Like I said, we're throwing small baits, so you need a very light, small rod to be able to throw this. So this is what I like to use if I'm going to use a bait caster and really feel like putting a lot of whip into the rod to get it out there. And the 6'9" is for target casting as well. So you can make a long-ish cast. You're never going to get a long cast with this popper, but you can make a long enough cast with the 6'9" rod. But if you also have a target that you need to hit, you can hit that as well. Or I've even thrown them on a spinning rod before, just a 7-foot medium if you wanted to go that route. And then I have a Corrado MGL 150 right here. This is the fast gear ratio, 7 gear ratio here, just to pick up the slack. A lot of times these fish will eat it, they come right at you, do anything like that. You're working the bait with the rod anyway, so it's just to pick up slack. And then I have it spooled with straight 30-pound braid on there, and that's it. So I don't use a leader, I just run it straight to the popper. Sometimes you'll get some tangles, but it is what it is. So let's head out on the water, toss this guy around, and see if we can catch a couple smallmouth. All right, so now that we talked about the setup for this popper, let's get to fishing this thing. This popper right here is literally my favorite popper that I've ever owned. I've had this since I was about 10 years old, and I've changed the hooks a million times. It's literally just a Rebel popper. This is nothing fancy. You can buy them in Walmart, and they're like $6 now, maybe. I don't know. I bought this one so long ago. They were like $3 when I bought them. I've fished so many places with this thing. Creeks, ponds, rivers, does not matter. I've caught fish all over. My first topwater fish ever came on this. And every summer I get it out and start throwing this thing because it's so much fun. So there's basically what we're doing today is we're going to be fishing the river for smallmouth bass. We're in the Pittsburgh rivers today, so you're going to see a lot of small fish if we can get them to eat the popper, that is. But it's still a lot of fun. It's one of my favorite things to do every year. They absolutely destroy a popper down here. And in the late summer, it's one of my favorite ways to fish no matter where I'm at, for a few reasons. One, your bait is going to be very small this time of year. So I've been seeing a lot of minnows jumping around and stuff in this area, and they're very small minnows. I mean, they're tiny, tiny minnows right now. Shad are spawned earlier this year, and the minnows that are left, or the shad that are left, are very small as well. So you want a bait that's small enough to actually imitate the forage that is around. The second reason that it's very popular for me this time of year and very effective is because these fish are going to be in very tight windows. What you'll notice we're fishing today is either small clumps of eelgrass that are up there, hoping that there's a fish that has claimed that as its home and that's its current break, or the other area that we're really going to fish this thing is small shade pockets that are up on the bank. And that's why we have that 6'9" rod, is so that I can tuck this bait right up in there. And a lot of times these fish are going to eat it in the first 2 or 3 pops. They're either going to be right there on the bank hiding in that shade, or there's not going to be a fish there at all. So like, I'm going to toss that thing right up next to the bank, pop it a couple times, not really anything there. We'll go ahead and bring that back in and make another cast. So you can let this bait sit in place this time of year, and that's going to get you more bites just because of the way these fish are going to set up. They're going to set up in those shade pockets because it gives them just a couple degrees colder water, some cover over their head, And most importantly, it's just more comfortable for them to live there. There's some oxygen and stuff that they'll have along, especially if there's some grass in combination with it in the area. Those are the types of places that I'm going to be looking for, because that's where these fish are going to hang out this time of year. And if you fish like a walk the dog bait or something, that's great. You throw it up there and within 3 seconds your bait's all the way out of the strike zone already, and it doesn't sit there in front of their face, nor does it mimic the right size forage. So that's why we choose a popper in the late summer. And we're going to go ahead and fish this thing around some shade and see if we can get some explosive blow-ups on some topwater. There we go. Got one on the popper. Not a big one, but we finally captured one. We've had quite a few bites on the popper so far. Go figure, the big camera was off. But we finally got one on the popper. We've had quite a few bites so far, but they've been missing the bait. I've had to kind of wait for the Labor Day hooligans to calm down for the night. And it's finally been calm enough. What was happening was that the wake of the boats was pushing up on the bank and creating a mud line. And when they would come up and swipe at the bait, they wouldn't get a clear look at it. And most often they would just go for this tail here because it's very fuzzy and bright, and that's the only thing they could see. And they'd end up grabbing that and completely miss the bait. So we're gonna throw him back. We're quickly running out of daylight, so there's a chance that might be the only fish we get on the popper today. But we're gonna keep trying. We're not gonna give up yet, because we have had quite a few bites here in the past couple minutes. So we're gonna get back to it and see if we can get us one more before it gets dark. And when I'm fishing this popper, all I'm really doing, I'm covering water with it a little bit now that it's starting to get dark, but earlier today, realistically when this popper will shine is when you have those shade lines up there, like early morning or later in the evening before it's really, really dark. And what I'll do is I'll throw it up there in those nice tight little pockets where I think those fish are. And I literally 2 pops and I'll let it sit for a second. Pop, pop, let it sit for a second. And one just tapped at it there, he missed it. Pop, let it sit. You can mix up your cadence. You can do 3 pops, you can do 1 pop, it really doesn't matter. But most importantly, you gotta let it sit there for a minute. It really depends on how much water you're trying to cover with it. So right now I'll try and move it a little bit further than I would earlier in the day. Earlier, I would give it like 1 or 2 pops and let it sit in that shade pocket. Now those fish will start roaming a little bit because it's a little bit nicer for them to get out and move around. And because of that, I'll start working my popper a little bit. I'll move it a little bit faster. And that's the nice part about a popper, is you can cover some water with it. And you can also target cast and let it sit in one spot as well. So we're gonna get to fishing this thing and hopefully get us one more here before the night's over. Well, unfortunately, that's gonna do it for the popper video. I barely can see anymore. I'm gonna have to turn my nav lights on to make it back in. I have my camera cranked up on ISO here so you can even see what's going on. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. We only caught one. We had some other bites, but we only put one in the boat. Usually this bite is much better. Don't be like me, go out on Labor Day in the middle of the day on a Sunday and try and catch fish with the heat beaming down and everybody running up and down the river crazy, and you'll have much better success than I did. If you want to see some other river fishing baits that I really enjoy throwing along with this popper, maybe they're not cooperating on the popper, check that video out right there. Some of those other baits will help you catch some more fish in the rivers as well. And I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Leave a like down below and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any more of my fishing videos coming up. Thanks for watching.